Hello and welcome everybody to today's webinar on connected and autonomous vehicles, moving towards autonomy. My name's Ross Morlock. I'm one of the directors here at Brake and part of Brake's global fleet team, where we work with fleet operators and suppliers to share resources and best practice across the industry. You should all now be able to see my presentation and hear the audio alongside it. As attendees, you're all muted, so you don't need to worry about any background noise in your offices. The vehicle fleet is changing at an unprecedented rate. A digital revolution is transforming transport, with billions of dollars being invested globally in a race to develop connected and autonomous vehicle technology. Today's webinar will see leading academics and practitioners discuss the latest technology being developed and tested across the world, and we'll explore what fleet managers should be doing now to prepare effectively for what lies ahead. Our speakers today are Tom Berg, a policy analyst at International Transport Forum, David Ward, Senior Technical Manager at Hariba Myra, Jonathan Flower, PhD researcher at Centre for Transport and Society at University of the West of England, and Ewan Parry, Principal Consultant at TRL. All of today's presentations are pre-recorded, but I'm delighted that we're joined by Jonathan Flower, and I hope Ewan Parry will be joining us live today as well to answer any questions you may have. There are two ways to put forward your questions to us. Firstly, there is a chat box on the webinar panel where you can send your question at any point during the webinar. Alternatively, there is a raise hand icon on the same panel. You can press this during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentations, and we will unmute you and you can put your question to the panel then directly over the phone. Before we start with the presentation, I just want to take the opportunity to give you a very brief overview of Brake, who we are and what we do. So Brake was set up and founded in 1995. We're a national road safety charity that exists to stop the needless deaths and serious injuries that happen on roads every day. We want to make streets and communities safer for everyone and care for families bereaved and injured in road crashes. Our vision is quite simple: a world that has zero road deaths and injuries, and a world where people can get around in ways that are safe, sustainable, fair and healthy. We promote road safety awareness, so safe and sustainable road use and effective road safety policies through campaigns, community education, information and advice for organisations operating fleets of vehicles and road safety professionals, and of course by running the UK's flagship road safety event, Road Safety Week, which takes place in November every year. We also provide essential support to people across the UK devastated by road death and serious injury to help them in their darkest hour. So in terms of support, we run a quality accredited free phone helpline in the UK for people bereaved and seriously injured in road crashes. You can see some information on the level of support we gave in 2017 on your screen now. In addition to the helpline, we also provide support literature and work very closely with police forces throughout the UK so that when someone does receive that knock on the door from a family liaison officer, they are providing them with best practice support literature. We campaign nationally and regionally to raise awareness among the public and to lobby government and push for change in road safety legislation. An example of this is our 2016 Roads to Justice campaign, which centred around getting justice for bereaved families. This UK campaign launched outside Parliament and gained a lot of media attention, and I'm sure most of you will have seen the changes to criminal driving sentencing announced in October 2017. We are, of course, now lobbying the UK government to make sure those changes are introduced. We also do a lot of campaigning more generally on raising awareness of a range of topics, some of which you can see on your screen now. Awareness raising and education in communities is delivered through projects such as our Beat Beat Days and Road Safety Week, the UK's flagship road safety event. Each year, Brake helps hundreds of companies run road safety projects in their communities and inspire children to be safe on our roads. We have a well-established events and resources to help you run activities locally to your business. Our community engagement team can help put you in touch with local schools and nurseries to give you advice on how to talk to different age groups, or your company can work with Brake to establish your very own community project. This year, Road Safety Week is taking place on the 19th to the 26th of November, and our theme is Bike Smart, focusing on the safety of those on two wheels, both cyclists and motorbikers. Please visit roadsafetyweek.org.uk to register for your free action pack, and please make sure you sign up to our Taking Part in Road Safety Week webinar, which is taking place in September. We also share training, tools and guidance on global fleet safety best practice through our Brake Professional membership service. We provide our members with tools to manage occupational road risk regardless of budget, fleet size or vehicle type. We run an annual calendar of events, including webinars such as today's and seminars and training throughout the year. We also have annual flagship events such as our Fleet Safety Conference and Fleet Safety Awards. In addition to these events, we also produce a lot of resources for employers, including guidance reports on introducing policies and sharing best practice case studies. Alongside that, we provide employers with tools to use directly with their drivers. And you can see on screen now some of the posters, infographics and videos that you can use to engage your own drivers. If you have any questions or would like to find out how you can get more involved with us here at Brake, please let us know. So, on to today's webinar. The presentations today will last for approximately 70 minutes. And as I referred to earlier, there'll be plenty of time to ask any questions at the end, should you have them. Without further ado, we'll start the first presentation now. So I'll hand you over to Tom at International Transport Forum, who's going to talk to us about the ITF report on safer roads with automated vehicles. Tom, over to you.
So I'm going to present the results of the International Transport Forum's report on safer roads with automated vehicles. The contents of the presentation I would like to take you through is first a very quick introduction of the ITF, who we are, what we're doing, what our mandate is. Then talk about one specific study we have been doing recently here at the ITF. And then as a background to that, talk a little bit about vehicle automation, road safety in general, and then what was a focus of this study, looking at the Safe Systems Vision's zero approach for road safety and how that applies or can apply or be made to apply to automated vehicles. Then touch a little bit on cybersecurity implications, which we looked at as well as part of this project, but with a very narrow focus of just those issues that relate directly to road safety. So anything that relates to movement of the vehicle or control over the movement of the vehicles, and then finish up with the key insights, the key recommendations coming out of this report. First of all, I would like to just introduce very quickly the International Transport Forum. We are part of the OECD in Paris. We're an intergovernmental organization, but somewhat separate to the OECD. So we have a wider membership. We have 59 member countries, and our main mandate as a think tank to give policy advice to the ministers of transport of those 59 member countries. We carry out our annual ministerial summit, always in May in Leipzig in Germany, where we have the most formal interaction with our ministers. In addition to this, we also have what we call our corporate partnership board, so a growing body of industry partners who also contribute to the organization and in a similar way to the countries give us an annual program of work. And as part of this, we had one project on road safety, as I said, a little bit cybersecurity aspects for automated vehicles. This report was formally launched, as all our CPB, Corporate Partnership Board, project reports do at our summit in May. It's now available on our website for download, and this is the particular piece of work I'd like to take you through in this presentation. As a starting point for this, we asked ourselves why we need it in the first place. Many discussions about vehicle automation are or seem to be driven by we have this technology, let's now go out and use it. And that probably is not the right starting point. We need to identify specific transport-related problems and then develop solutions, and probably will be a mix of solution, and quite likely vehicle automation in some shape or form will be part of that mix. So we identified 4 key reasons why it does make sense to use vehicle automation. So the first is when it's actually dangerous for humans to carry out the driving task, so for driving impaired. The second one, when it is impossible for humans to carry out the driving task, so for example, night driving or anything that is beyond a direct line of sight, where with vehicle-to-vehicle communication, automated vehicles could actually look around a corner. So a clear reason. The third one, when carrying out a task that is difficult for humans, so rapidly reacting to sudden obstacle. We've seen many examples recently where we're probably not really there yet, but certainly in the long term, once the sensor technology, the algorithm gets more perfected, that is something where clearly a machine will perform better than a human. And the fourth one, and I alluded to that at the beginning, just for the sake of automation, creating a market if no safety benefit actually is there for the users. And currently what we're hearing is a combination of all 4 of those. So just very briefly touching on vehicle automation, and one of the insights will actually be somewhat of a criticism of this, but this is a good start. So often referenced in discussions about vehicle automation are the SAE levels of automation from 1 to 5, and 0 being no automation. 1 and 2 basically are increasing levels of sophistication for assistance functionalities, but with a very clear role for the driver. The driver just is being helped with certain tasks, but it's very clear, fully in charge of the driving. And 4 or 5 different levels of automation with the driver really not being that involved anymore at all. 5 actually being the point when there won't be a steering wheel and it can go everywhere. And this is quite a wide definition. Some people say we might actually, in the widest definition of this, never get there. We're certainly far away from it. Level 4 is basically also fully automated, but in specific geofenced areas. And if these areas are quite small and controlled, then we've been there for a couple of years already. In the middle between those two, the levels of assistance and the levels of automation is the level 3, where, and I come back to that at the insights at the end of this presentation, it actually from a road safety and particularly Vision Zero point of view gets a bit tricky, because this is a level of automation where it might feel to the user like this is pretty sophisticated automation, but the system actually relies on the user being very readily able to take over. And this is where it gets problematic with Vision Zero. And I come to Vision Zero and what that exactly means and what the implications are for automated vehicles in the next slide. Just comparing strengths and weaknesses and related to that roles of a driver or a person on board compared to a machine. And we can see the first 4 tasks: speed, power output, consistency, information processing, memory. No, actually first 5, very clearly hardware, software system, once it's perfected. And again, I'd like to stress the point, we're not really there yet. And there are differing opinions when we get there. Some people say we are maybe a year away from it. Some people actually think we're decades away from it. So we are not there yet. Once it is perfected, probably those 5, clearly a machine and the software can perform better. Then we come to the reasoning. There, unless we have huge improvements in artificial intelligence and really have a machine that in every aspect is like a human, but again, we are probably quite a while away from that, a human will be better. The sensing, it's a little bit mixed results, some strengths here, some weaknesses there. And for the perception, again, humans are actually better. So I think this is actually a very important figure, a very important comparison, because the discussion, the superficial discussion on vehicle automation always makes it sound like a machine is always better, and that actually is not the case really. And moving on from that to safe systems and Vision Zero. So this is very much based in the ITF in different fields, not just for road safety, not for vehicle automation, but road safety more generally, has done a lot of work on safe systems and Vision Zero. So the starting point of that really is to acknowledge that humans are humans, that people will make mistakes, and that these in turn then can lead to road crashes, that the human body has a limited physical ability to tolerate these crashes, and harm can likely occur, and that there is a shared responsibility between everybody involved in designing, building, managing, and using roads and vehicles, including the post-crash care afterwards, to make sure this doesn't happen. And all parts of the system needs to be strengthened in order to make sure that if one part fails, road users are still protected. So coming back to what I said in an earlier slide about level 3, the big problem with level 3 is we are kind of pretending humans are not humans, but they are. And so in level 3, it would mean all the time the driver or passenger on board will have to monitor maybe, but certainly be able to very quickly take over control of the vehicle. But it feels like it's automated. So there have been experiments where people were actually asked specifically in a laboratory context to do this kind of task, and they were not able to do it for a particularly long time. So there will be distraction. People will start using their mobile phones, reading something, whatever, and then will just not be able to take over quickly enough. So level 3, certainly from a Vision Zero safe systems approach, a big problem. Another slide on this, just to explain it again. So what is the difference or the innovation of this approach when compared to traditional road safety policies? The traditional approach was to try and prevent all crashes. In the safe systems approach, it's specifically looking at preventing, not trying to actually making sure we prevent any crash that can result in fatal and serious casualties. So corresponding to that, the appropriate goal before has been to reduce numbers. Now it's not about reduction, it's about zero fatalities. And the way this is being done is by moving from the old reactive approach to a proactive approach of actively managing that, as I said in the earlier slide, and very clearly putting the human at the center of it. So whereas before it was the attitude, if a crash occurs, it is because of a non-compliant road user or usage. And now at the center is people will make mistakes, and we need to have a forgiving system that this will not lead to any road deaths or serious casualties. Responsibility before very much with the road user, now moving that to a shared responsibility, and similar to that point before we had isolated interventions, and now it's a comprehensive safe system that takes care of this. Moving on from that to cybersecurity, a few slides on that. Probably in this context somewhat less important, but I wanted to just cover this as well. And as I said before, we were not looking at wider issues here with privacy and protection and all of that, which is extremely important, but we had to concentrate on specific aspects, and we said we only look at cybersecurity as far as it relates directly to road safety performance of vehicles. A multitude of risks from designer, manufacturer, vendor, the maintainer of the systems, the infrastructure, law enforcement and traffic management, and endpoint vulnerabilities. A key point we looked at was secure identities. I come to that on the next slide, but here just a few key principles that came out of a piece of work done in the United Kingdom, where we had principles that security is not something, cybersecurity, that is a patch that is put onto a problem at some point, but that it is promoted at board level and an organizational approach that is present at every stage of the process, including supply chains, that there is product aftercare and incident response, that all stakeholders involved work together, that security of software is managed throughout the lifetime, that storage and transmission of data is secure and can be controlled, and that the whole system is resilient to attacks. And we also, in this report, looked at different approaches for establishing trust in communication between vehicles, between vehicle and infrastructure. And there is also a clear relation here to the European Commission's work on cooperative ITS, so the framework they've been setting for how vehicles talk to each other and talk with infrastructure and via infrastructure. So a lot of work is going on there, and I do not want to go too much into the technical details. As I said, this report is available for download on our website, so any more details will be in there. So now coming to the key recommendations coming out of this piece of work. So very much a starting point was to reinforce the safe systems approach and to apply vision zero thinking to automated driving. It's very important to avoid safety performance being used to market competing automated vehicles. So here there's a clear need for government oversight that this is not a distinctive feature in a commercial way. That going forward, we need to very carefully assess the safety impacts of systems that share driving tasks between human and machine. So anything that happens up to level 5. There's a lot of work going on, and actually at a summit session in May touching on these kind of subjects, we heard about research going on in the US, for example, on symbiotic operation of a vehicle. So the machine and the human on board not switching tasks whenever it's necessary, but working on it together and one helping the other whenever. And this comes back to the earlier table of who is better or worse at some tasks. So working on it as a team to operate the vehicle. It was also felt that it's very important to have reporting of safety relevant data from automated vehicles to regulators, that we can really judge who is performing well and that everybody is able to learn from early mistakes. And also to develop and use a stage testing regime for automated vehicles. So avoid the situations where a reasonably untested technology or software update is pushed onto the market and drivers are kind of used as human guinea pigs, but only release anything to the public once safety is absolutely proven. So in the development stage, start off with modeling. Obviously, there are constraints to it, but a lot of work can be done with modeling. Then start testing in private environments, and only then slowly use to public testing. But there, ideally, and this looks more at the fleet side of using this technology, having a safety driver, a trained safety driver with regulated working hours, break times, and all of that. And we've seen in the media, even that can unfortunately go wrong sometimes. But only then, after this has been done, and everybody involved, the companies and the regulators and the users, I suppose, are convinced that this is safe. Going back to the cybersecurity section, to establish comprehensive cybersecurity principles for automated driving, and to ensure that there is a functional isolation of safety critical system components. And this really goes back to the first publicized incident of hacking of a vehicle, the infamous example of the Jeep that was remote controlled and where it was possible to actually get into the vehicle through the onboard infotainment system that was at the point not firewalled off from safety relevant function. And the last one, providing clear and targeted messaging of vehicle capabilities. And that goes back to my earlier comment about the 5 SAE levels of automation. It's important when we talk about vehicle automation that we have a reference framework. So for that, it's absolutely vital to have this. And for technical experts, it probably is pretty good. It's still, people can define it slightly differently if you look at detail, but it's useful for that. But we felt, certainly for two groups, we probably need to come up with a different way of explaining both what a vehicle is capable of and what the roles and responsibilities of a human on board are. And so this is particularly important for policymakers talking about shaping policy responses to in the transition to vehicle automation, and the second one for the vehicle owners, passenger, driver, whatever you want to call that person inside that vehicle. So these were the key messages coming out of this report. As I said, the whole report can be downloaded from the ITF website. On this slide, you can see the web address for it, but if you just Google ITF and safer roads with automated vehicles, you will be directed to this report. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Tom. I think some really interesting but really important areas covered off there, and a really good introduction to our final three speakers for today's webinar. Just a reminder really that if you do have any questions for Tom and for other speakers that are not joining us live today, then please do put them into the question box, and we can certainly put those questions to the speakers once today's webinar is finished, and circulate their responses to them. Our next presentation will be delivered by David Ward from Hariba Myra. David's going to look at the implications of autonomous technology on driver behaviour and driver training. So I'll pass over to David's presentation now.
So good afternoon, my name is Dr. David Ward from Hariba Myra, where I'm Senior Technical Manager for Functional Safety, and I'd like to talk to you today about driverless vehicles. Are we nearly there yet? Specifically the implications of autonomous technology on driver behaviour and driver training. In my presentation, I'd like to cover the following subjects. First of all, I'd like to explain briefly what we mean by automation. Secondly, to recap on the approach to safety in the automotive industry and the journey that we are on safety-wise. Thirdly, to talk about some of the implications for driver training and driver behaviour. And finally, to summarise with some conclusions and outlook. So the first topic is to explain exactly what we mean by automation. There are many different terms that people use in the context of automated vehicles, terms such as autonomous, highly automated, self-driving cars, connected and autonomous vehicles, and so on. So on this slide, I'm showing some examples of automated features or automated vehicles that people may be aware of or familiar with. On the top left, I'm showing an example of the type of feature in vehicles that many of us will be becoming familiar with. This is automatic emergency braking, where the vehicle is able to measure the distance to a vehicle in front, and if the closing distance and closing speed becomes too close, then the vehicle is able to warn the driver and also to apply the brakes to intervene to either help prevent a collision or to mitigate the closing speed. For many people, the vision of automated vehicles is what we're showing in the bottom left, a vehicle that's able to make an arbitrary journey completely under automation without human driver intervention. We also need to be aware there are other more specific applications of autonomy. Top right, we're showing a different type of vehicle that's being trialled at low speed in urban settings. And also we shouldn't discount, bottom right, new modes of transport, such as the PRT system at Heathrow, which we're showing here. And one of the interesting questions that was faced when that system was initially being designed is whether that's in fact a car or a train, and which safety principles should apply. So there are many different examples of automated vehicles, many different words in circulation. What I'd like to do briefly is just to give the technical definitions that we use in the automotive industry. And these are defined in a document called SAE J3061. And this document specifically avoids terms such as autonomous and self-driving, preferring instead to talk about levels of automation and to talk about the allocation of responsibilities for driving between the electronic systems and the human driver. So a system with no automation, level 0, is one that simply gives information to the driver. So a feature such as lane departure warning is an example of that. A system that can provide support in one direction of motion, for example, controlling the steering only, is a level 1 system. Lane keep assist is an example of this, and the expectation is that the human driver is in full-time control. This system is providing support to the driving task. Level 2 systems are where the system can control both the lateral and longitudinal motion of the vehicle. An example of that will be something like a traffic jam assistant, which is able to drive the vehicle at low speeds in queuing traffic, but with the expectation that the driver is fully in the loop and monitoring situations that the automated system does not address. When we move on to level 3, this is a level that's called conditional automation. This is where the system is able to drive the vehicle completely automatically under limited circumstances, but with the expectation that a human driver will take over when signaled to. An example of this is highway chauffeur. Some manufacturers are bringing this to the market now, where a vehicle is capable of being driven automatically for an extended period of time on the motorway. Level 4 and level 5 represent fully automated vehicles. The difference between level 4 and level 5 is that typically level 4 vehicles will drive automatically within a defined context. So that might, for example, be an automated valet parking system, or the use of an automated ride-sharing platform that's geofenced to only operate in a defined area. And then level 5, of course, is the vision of the so-called Google car, where the vehicle is able to drive completely automatically end-to-end in an arbitrary journey. So I think it's important to note that when we're discussing these technologies in the automotive industry, we prefer to talk about levels of automation rather than using some of these terms which can be quite ambiguous in different contexts. I'd like now to move on to consider how the understanding and approaches to safety in the automotive industry has developed. The approaches and understanding of safety in the automotive industry started with what we now call passive safety. This is technology such as airbags and the physical design of vehicles that are designed to reduce the severity of an incident once it has occurred. We then moved on to consider active safety systems. This includes, for example, automatic emergency braking and stability control. These are designed to help prevent a critical situation that will be difficult for a driver to control from becoming an incident. But we've now moved on, in addition, to consider what I describe as tactical safety systems. These are systems that assist the driver such that critical situations are avoided in the first place. Anything from systems that detect driver fatigue or inattention through to some of the highly automated features that I've been describing. And one of the important factors related to this is clearly this is driving a significant and continued growth in the electronics content of vehicles. When we come to consider how we design vehicles from a safety perspective, one of the factors that we have to consider is that the driver is part of the control loop in vehicle systems, but receives very little specific training in operating advanced systems in vehicles. What we find is that the driver forms a mental model of the way that the vehicle they are driving is responding to their control inputs, and the influence on the driver's perception, particularly if there's a malfunction in the system, is an important safety consideration. So a lot of the effort that we put into designing electronic systems in vehicles is around detecting and preventing and mitigating the effects of malfunction in electronic systems and the software within them. But a key assumption in the way that we approach design of these systems in vehicles at the moment includes assuming that the driver is present and has final control, and that if an electronic system experiences a malfunction, it can be switched off and can revert to manual control using other systems and/or mechanical backups. The technical term that we use for that is fail-silent behaviour. So against that background of the types of technologies that we're deploying in vehicles, what are the implications for driver behaviour and driver training? First of all, in considering some of the driver behaviour issues, we have to consider what I first of all called normal behaviour. And one important factor we have to take into consideration is that normal, in quotation marks, driver behaviour may be different from the assumptions and experience of engineers who develop the system. So it's very important to have input from people who are experts on driver behaviour and the wide range of driver skills that we experience, such that we design systems to take account of a wide range of driver skills and abilities. But we also have to consider some more interesting situations, and perhaps one of the best examples of this is a topic that we call reasonably foreseeable misuse. It's basically saying how far in the design of systems do we have to go, predicting things that drivers may do that are reasonable or otherwise. And the picture I'm showing here is an example of very bad behaviour, which we certainly actively discourage in the automotive industry. This is an image of a vehicle equipped with a lane keep assist system. When we're designing systems like this, often vehicle manufacturers will put many disclaimers in the handbook saying that systems like this are not to be used for hands-free driving, but inevitably what happens is drivers try it. So we have to design in a system that's designed to detect whether the driver is still holding the hand wheel and to disable or discourage use of the system if the driver is trying to behave in that way. What it was then found in one particular vehicle is that a driver could attach an object to the steering wheel, which could then trick the system into thinking that the driver was still holding the wheel. So then we have to consider maybe a different type of sensing system to discourage that behaviour. But one of the key questions that we have to consider is how far do we go in the technical design of systems? And usually the assumption is that a driver is licensed for the type of vehicle they're driving, is driving with due care and attention, and is in a fit state to drive the vehicle. So it's clear that driver education about the capabilities of these systems, what they should and should not be used for, is very important. Secondly, we have to consider how people react to failures or perceive failures in a system, and this will become very important, even more important as we move towards some of the high levels of automation, particularly where there is handover between the system driving the vehicle and the human driver. And finally, I believe we also need to question whether long-standing assumptions about driver ability to respond to failure using mechanical backup are still valid. There's legal requirements about minimum levels of braking and steering performance that have to be provided through mechanical backups, but we have to evaluate whether drivers are still able to react in the expected ways to such failures, particularly in the context of highly automated systems. Another important factor that we have to consider is the way that drivers modify their behaviour when we provide them with high levels of automation. We have to consider, for example, whether drivers maintain attentiveness in the presence of automation. Generally speaking, if drivers feel that a system like this is giving them support, then they will become less attentive, even if they are intended to be monitoring it. We also have to educate and manage driver expectations of the purpose, capability and maturity of many of these systems, what the systems are intended to be used for, what they are not intended to be used for. And we have to couple that with well-documented phenomena in human behaviour, such as risk compensation and de-skilling, where on the one hand, perhaps drivers feel that systems in vehicles allow them to take risks that really they should not do. So again, there's an important education factor there. We also have to consider de-skilling. So if drivers become used to automation or levels of comfort, what happens if those features are removed or they move to a vehicle where those features are no longer present? And good example of de-skilling is the braking issue I referred to. Drivers now are so used to vehicles with power assisted brakes that many drivers may panic when faced with a hard brake pedal if there's a failure, even though the brakes are still working and within minimum legal requirements. The final topic is that there's a group of interesting ethical and legal questions around the deployment of automated systems. Thinking about some of the ethical questions, we've come across, for example, researchers debating whether a highly automated function may have to choose between the lesser of two evils if a vehicle is found in a critical situation with an outcome that could lead potentially to different incidents that the system may have to choose between. Personally, I feel that's completely the wrong question. That's completely ignoring the point of tactical safety that I referred to at the start of my presentation, where the whole objective of deploying these systems into vehicles is to help prevent the vehicles getting into a critical situation, never mind an incident occurring. Another group of questions is around the liability and legal issues. So, for example, who's responsible if a highly automated vehicle is involved in an incident? I'm an engineer, not a lawyer, but I'm given to understand that under some legal systems at the moment, even if the vehicle is completely automated, the person that is sitting in the vehicle is still deemed to be in control of that vehicle. Therefore, they must still be in a fit condition to drive it. And we have to ask whether some of these legal issues will change depending on the level of automation that's applied. I think another potentially contentious issue is the way that highly automated vehicles implement traffic rules. And certainly I recently had the experience of being in a demonstrator vehicle where it stopped at a junction, and the vehicle was taking its time to evaluate the scene around the vehicle, deciding whether it was safe to move off, and meanwhile drivers in vehicles behind in the queue were becoming agitated and starting to sound horns and so on. So we have to think very carefully about how to make sure that these systems are safer than the humans that they're replacing, but that they don't also create safety situations by the way that they interact with other traffic. So finally, to conclude, in my presentation, I hope that I've demonstrated that highly automated vehicles and highly automated features in vehicles are a reality, and these will grow in market penetration and acceptance. What we're finding is many vehicle manufacturers introducing these features to enhance the level of safety in their vehicles. We're also seeing legal pressures. For example, there's a new European Commission ruling that within 3 years, a whole raft of many of these safety features will have to be installed as standard fit in new models of vehicles. However, as we've seen, deployment of these features raises new challenges and questions about the driver interaction with these systems, driver behaviours and expectation, and indeed whether particular training is given to drivers of vehicles in operating these systems. My final point is to say, really, we're all in this together. It's an issue that governments, that vehicle manufacturers, that professional driving associations, safety charities, etc. We really all need to work on this together so that we can deploy these systems and enhance the levels of safety that are experienced on our roads.
Thank you, David. Lots there, I think, for us all to be thinking about, and particularly from a fleet management perspective around, certainly around the points around kind of driver behaviour and training that is and will increasingly be required for our drivers. So yeah, lots to take away from that. Thank you. Our next speaker is Jonathan Flower from the Centre for Transport and Society. Jonathan's going to talk about how autonomous vehicles interact with cyclists and pedestrians. So we'll move on to Jonathan's presentation now.
In this short presentation, I want to consider some of the implications that arise when streets where pedestrians and cyclists who have legitimate rights of way for a century or more begin to share that space with increasingly automated vehicles and eventually fully autonomous vehicles. By way of introduction, I'm Jonathan Flower. I'm a researcher at the Centre for Transport and Society based at the University of the West of England in Bristol, which is in the UK. I've been designing and coordinating human factor participant trials over the last couple of years with autonomous vehicles as part of the Venture project, which is coming to an end this month. Venture is one of a number of autonomous vehicle projects that the Centre for Transport and Society is currently involved with. In trial 1, we looked at handover scenarios where drivers handed control to the autonomous vehicle or the autonomous vehicle returned control to the driver. In trial 2, we looked at the trust of participants who were passengers in an autonomous vehicle as it interacted with other motor vehicles. And then finally, in trial 3, which will be our primary concern today, we looked at the trust ratings of participants when the autonomous vehicle interacted with pedestrians and cyclists. Another project we're involved in is called Flourish, which is looking at the potential role of autonomous vehicles for people that may have limited access to driving, such as older and disabled people, considering issues such as user interfaces with autonomous vehicles. Capri is developing a testing pods. And next month I'll be testing one with participants at Filton Airfield in Bristol at higher speeds than these have previously been used at. And next year we will be doing more trials with pedestrians and cyclists. We're also working with Highways England on connected autonomous vehicle pilot implementation projects. And then finally, Multicav is our latest project, which is just about to start, in which mobility as a service will include connected or autonomous vehicles as part of the modal mix in a real-world setting, including public transport partners. Mobility as a service moves consumers away from personally owning modes of transport to buying a contract for their transport that would span different modes and different operators. The University of the West of England is involved in research and evaluation, that side of the project. On the Ventura project, as we developed the autonomous vehicle technology, we were acutely aware of the complexity within the typical urban road network that autonomous vehicles will have to contend with. We need to remember that pedestrians and/or cyclists have the right of way in almost all of the public space in our cities, including the carriageway. So the idea that autonomous vehicles need to behave well around them is not merely a nice add-on, it's fundamentally important. Cities are places for people, and making urban streets work for pedestrians and cyclists is becoming increasingly important for policymakers around the world, from Bogota to London. So this should be front and centre when we are planning changes. In the UK, like many other nations, we have over decades normalised cities are dominated by large numbers of motor vehicles, which are the cause of a lot of pollution, congestion and risk. Autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles might be part of the future city and help to address some of these issues, but so will sharing those streets with pedestrians and cyclists. Returning to the Ventura project, the last of 3 trials was undertaken on 12.5 working days from January to April this year. The trials involved the Wildcat autonomous vehicle shown on the left, and we also used the Ventura simulator, which simulated the autonomous vehicle in the same scenarios and using the same decision-making system. Members of the public experienced a series of scenarios on both platforms, and they rated their trust in the autonomous vehicle after it had performed different maneuvers. Trust was rated on a scale from 0 to 10, where 0 was no trust and 10 was complete trust. Overall, we found that people's expectation of safety in an autonomous vehicle were much higher than in a manually driven vehicle. These are the 7 events that participants experienced. 3 involved no interaction with other road users. They were crossing an empty zebra crossing, overtaking a parked car and turning right into a side road. 2 involved interactions with a pedestrian. They were at a zebra crossing and crossing a side road. And finally, 2 involved interactions with the cyclists, and that was overtaking a parked car with an oncoming cyclist and turning right into a side road with an oncoming cyclist. We set up a test circuit on partially closed campus roads at the University of the West of England. And during a circuit of the 4 loops shown on the screen, the participants experienced all 7 events. They repeated this twice, so 3 circuits in all, both in the real world and in the simulator. Now, these pictures you can see were taken during our test runs. In the actual trial, the pedestrians did not wear high-vis vests, as you can see in the picture on the bottom right. 134 members of the public took part. 1/3 were people whose main mode was driving, and they experienced the scenarios from inside the autonomous vehicle. The remaining 2/3 were people whose main mode for local journeys was by foot or by bike. These participants observed the same scenarios from the footways. In each case, they rated their trust in the autonomous vehicle after each manoeuvre. Overall, trust ratings were high, and we concluded that exposure to autonomous vehicles in safe environments yields generally high trust ratings from all road user types. It is possible that appearance of a very safe environment is having an impact on the trust scores, and therefore future research should examine how trials can appear to be less closely managed while still retaining the high levels of safety required for a trial. This could involve marshals wearing more discreet clothing or being more physically removed towards the boundary of the testing area, rather than being obviously present in high-vis vests and with radios. Of course, this was not an issue when we were using the simulator. In both the Wildcat autonomous vehicle and the simulator, there was no significantly difference in trust ratings given by the cyclist, driver, and pedestrian participants. We concluded that it's not necessary to differentiate messaging for different road user types, as this is not a factor that affects trust ratings, and most road users switch modes at different times. The two scenarios with statistically significant differences between the two platforms were, firstly, approaching an empty zebra crossing, and this was the first scenario in the circuit, and the lower ratings in the simulator were perhaps due to the sound of an over-revving engine and apparent wheel spin at the start in the simulator only. The second one was overtaking a parked car with an oncoming cyclist, which had no immediately obvious explanation. The similarity in results between platforms was helped to validate the simulator, which means that we can use the simulation to test more risky scenarios. We did this in trial 2, where in the simulator only we pulled out at junctions and overtook vehicles with oncoming vehicles, with a gap acceptance that half of drivers would reject. Those drivers would yield to the oncoming vehicle. Obviously, we can't expose real pedestrians and cyclists and other road users to undue risk during testing, but the simulator enables us to push the boundaries a bit further. After 2 circuits in autonomous mode in the simulator, the driver participant manually drove the car, and the pedestrian and cyclist rated their trust in the driver instead of the autonomous vehicle. Trust ratings were slightly higher when the simulator was being manually driven as opposed to driving in autonomous mode. But it should be noted that when rating the driver, the participants were different each time, and unlike the simulator autonomous vehicle, which was always the same. Also, the manual drive always occurred after the autonomous circuits, and generally trust ratings increased from circuit 1 to circuit 2. One takeaway is that even though the technology is very new, the participants already trust it almost as much as human drivers. In both the simulator and the Wildcat autonomous vehicle, there were no statistically significant correlations between trust ratings in any of the scenarios and age, gender, or driving experience. So older participants are not more or less likely to trust the autonomous vehicle, and the same can be said for more experienced drivers. It should be noted that, as in trial 2, we found that trust ratings didn't differ by age, gender, or driving experience, but people's attitude to technology was a significant factor. Those that were more accepting of technology had significantly more trust in the autonomous vehicle than those that were generally less inclined to embrace technology. Horizon 2020 is a European Union research funding open to British and other EU companies and academic institutions until the end of this funding round. This bid is open until April 2019 and is worth about $30 million. From our recent trials, we have learned that if autonomous vehicles are introduced in obviously safe settings, all road user types are willing to accept them. However, the public expects autonomous vehicles to be safer than manually driven vehicles, and so they should only be introduced when they're capable of meeting that expectation. If you have any questions or comments, I'll be happy to respond to them, but feel free to contact me if we don't have time to deal with your questions today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I think a really interesting piece of research there. I can see we've had a number of comments throughout actually thanking us for sharing that research today, and a number of questions that have come through as well, which we'll put to you at the end of today's webinar. So thank you very much for that. Our final presentation today is delivered by Ewan Parry at TRL. Ewan's going to present on and discuss the Smart Mobility Living Lab. So we'll start that presentation for you now.
Okay, well, thank you to Break for having TRL on this webinar. My name is Ewan Parry. I'm from Transport Research Laboratory, and I'm Market Development Lead for New Mobility. I'm speaking today about the Smart Mobility Living Lab in London, which is a new development that we have been working on for a little while now, that is focusing on creating a connected and autonomous vehicle testbed here in London. So TRL is an independent non-profit distributing company. We specialise in doing transport research and consultancy right across transport or the field of transport. We're well known in safety terms, and no doubt you'll be aware of our over 80 years of work in this area, firstly through being part of the UK government, and 20 years ago now coming out of government and operating as independent, impartial, non-profit distributing organisation. So we've got quite extensive facilities and undertake research that covers topics from reducing fatalities and serious injuries to reducing cost inefficiencies in transport, harmful emissions, barriers to mobility and unforeseen delays. And what I really want to talk today about is, or those areas that relate most closely to the development of new technologies, and in particular, as I say, the connected and autonomous vehicle technologies that we will be testing and helping to develop in the London testbed. Some examples of some projects that we're working on for public sector organisations. We provide input, or well, we actually provide guidance to the European Commission on the General Safety Regulation Programme, which is all about understanding what technologies can be fitted to vehicles to deliver the best benefits in terms of safety, and therefore which should go through to regulation. We've been working with the Commission on other areas such as Regulation 79, which is all about regulations to assist the introduction of autonomous vehicles. eCall, the emergency call system in the case of collisions where incidents occur and people are unable to call the emergency services. And event data recorders, EDR, there at the bottom, another key area where we're working with the Commission to get really useful high resolution data from incidents when they occur, so we can better understand those incidents. And then in the UK, working with the Department of Transport, Highways England, Transport for London, to name a couple, and some really interesting programs there. We continue to lead the Road Accident In-Depth Study, RAIDS program, which captures huge amounts of in-detail evidence from scenes of incidents so that we can learn from that information and continually improve road safety. We're currently taking forward with Highways England a platooning project for heavy goods vehicle platooning, looking at the cost benefits of introducing that type of technology on our roads. And we're working with Highways England as well on the A2 Connected Corridor programme. And more recently with Transport for London as well, we're working on the bus safety standards for the next generation of buses to be introduced into the capital, and on systems like cyclist detection, and of course TRL write the software that runs all of the traffic signals in London as well through the Scoot system. So just a bit of a background as to who we are, and I'll move on to our work with connected and autonomous vehicles. So over the last couple of years, TRL has led a number of projects, including the Gateway project, and the development of projects such as Move UK and the Merge Greenwich project and Atlas, all focused on improving the technologies and helping to develop the technologies that are evolving around connected and automated systems. We're currently working with Oxbow on the development of the Driven program. This is the Oxbow vehicle in the bottom right of the screen here, and with another startup in the UK, 5AI, who are again working with artificial intelligence systems to develop and improve the processes of automated driving. And up on the picture at the top and on the left-hand side is our Gateway pod. Gateway is a project that we've recently finished in which we undertook the trialing of multiple pods in Greenwich, and used that to help users have an experience of automated transport systems, and to start generating views of users in terms of both people experience a ride in the vehicle and outside the vehicle, as to perceptions of automated technologies and how we think that these things might develop in the future. Picture down there in the bottom left, we even continued our trialing while the beast from the east was coming in. So we had a full range of quite interesting weather conditions to undertake our work within. So that project's now finished. So the Gateway website is still up and running, and there are lots of great materials on that, lots of great published information on the Gateway website. So if you search Gateway Project and then go to the publications area of that website, you can see some interesting information. And of course, these projects are being built around on the basis of the connectivity that is seeped into everyday life from a personal mobility point of view or personal connectivity point of view. Our vehicles are more connected, our signal systems are more connected, our intelligent infrastructures are of course connected, and we're really at the verge of a time when we will be able to connect together these systems that at the moment are quite disparate and really drive a huge amount of value out of that, both from a network operational point of view, but also a vehicle operational point of view, and from a personal point of view, being able to get much more value out of connected mobility services, whether we're using our own private vehicles or whether we're using more connected systems such as mobility as a service. I'm speaking today about the Smart Mobility Living Lab in London, and this has come about through a major government funding initiative around supporting connected and autonomous vehicles in the UK. Back in 2016, the Chancellor's statement committed 100 million vehicles to the generation of new UK CAV test infrastructure. And the Smart Mobility Living Lab was one of 2 public test environments to be successful, along with Coventry in the Midlands, and alongside 2 controlled off-road facilities, one representing urban and city environments and one representing higher speed limit handling environments, and they're being led by Millbrook and Race and Ariba Myra. In the case of London, the Smart Mobility Living Lab is really intended to provide a test bed for connected and autonomous services, and really the testing of the mobility services as well that these sorts of vehicles and technologies can deliver in the future. And these really focus on 2 areas for us. This is pre-user testing, we're calling that alpha testing. This is before the users get their hands on the technology. So how do we prove that automated, connected systems are safe to utilize, that are reliable to utilize in urban environments, and really deliver what we expect them to deliver in terms of multiple performance objectives. And then we're looking at the beta side of it. So when we are assured as to the level of performance of the technologies in real world, complex real world conditions, we can start then inviting users to participate in trials to really understand how well these types of systems actually deliver to the expectations of travelling public. And this was something that the Gateway project really tried to establish, and really took a first step in establishing in terms of automated technologies. But as we move into an on-road environment, clearly the use cases of these technologies are going to get more complex, and the operational environment are going to get more complex as well. So we've got a lot of hope and expectation of connected and autonomous vehicles and the solutions that they can provide, but we need an environment really to test and evaluate how well those vehicles perform in the real world conditions, and then how well the services that they offer can be delivered. And through TRL's role in this, we're really offering independent expert support for getting these kinds of trials off and running in real world conditions, and ensuring that the right kind of safety protocols are developed and delivered. And that really has been TRL's primary role in several of these projects that I showed you earlier, in terms of providing that level of assurance and safety case and risk management that is really required for these types of projects on the road. And we're working alongside Transport for London in this case. Really important our transport authorities are involved in these trials, and we're working hand in hand with TfL and the boroughs in terms of the London Borough of Greenwich and other boroughs as needed. We're also then looking to develop new test methodologies for being able to prove how well automated vehicles actually do perform in the real world. And these are test methodologies that don't exist today. This is a little bit like rewinding probably more than 30 years to pre-NCAP days, and saying, how do we really develop a new test methodology to assess the safety of vehicles? And that's what led to the new car assessment program and all of the various tests that we have for physical testing of safety in vehicles. But now, as we look towards connected autonomous vehicles, so we have a challenge whereby we need to understand how well an automated vehicle will perform, and we need a new set of tests and evaluation methodologies for those. So again, that's part of the role of the test bed here, and we'll be putting new test equipment onto vehicles and in the field to start developing evidence around what methodologies of testing really provide the best indication of how well these systems will perform in the real world. I've talked about how we'll be putting equipment on and off vehicles, and then developing evaluation methods for pre-user and user testing. In addition to that, then we want to, and we're going to need to engage with user groups, both in the vehicles, outside the vehicles, and other stakeholder groups, to get that kind of perception of how well these types of technologies are delivering to the needs of users in the real world. And we'll be supporting UK innovation as that happens. So the team that we're working with is a team made from public sector in London, so DG Cities in Greenwich and Transport for London, but our industry leads are Cisco and Cubic. We're also working with London Legacy Development Corporation and Loughborough University, who are providing academic input into the programme, and also working alongside Millbrook and Surrey 5G Innovation Centre. And this is really putting together a team that can build the facility and operate a facility through TRL and digital cities to provide services for connected and autonomous vehicle evaluation in the future. And of course, London provides a fantastic location for this type of testing. Not only is it very visible from an international perspective, we have many organisations in London who want to be seen to be innovating and aligning with the kind of innovation that we can provide. But London has many challenges in terms of mobility. It has multiple different types of use cases, which we can look to utilise, or you look to test alongside in order to understand how these types of automated transport system can deliver the needs of whether it be personal mobility or the needs of business-to-business services. With the innovation sector in London as well, this is a major advantage I think that London has in terms of really vibrant startup community and the interest from within that community in supporting and enabling new mobility solutions. So we have quite an interesting melting pot in London that we can use to develop this and test this connected and autonomous vehicle technology. So we think about what we're actually doing. I mentioned about the alpha testing, and this is all about how we get vehicles on road and get the technologies tested and evaluated within a real world scenario. This is about understanding the risk, identifying risk, mitigating risk. We've gone through a very long process of that with our Gateway project and also with the on-road autonomous vehicle projects we're undertaking at the moment. It's really important we're engaging with stakeholders and planning trials in the right way, in a way that ensures that these sorts of new technology, the test and evaluation exercises, are being done in a really safe and controlled manner. Because what we don't want to see clearly is incidents like we've seen in the US, with trials being undertaken in a way that has led to unsafe scenarios. We're generating then data from our testbed through giving ourselves the opportunity to create external data sets from equipment that is positioned in the road environment, rather than relying on the vehicle itself to collect all the data. And this provides a bit of a differentiator for what we're doing and how we're going about thinking about how we test and evaluate automated vehicles in the future. We really see the need for external data to be added to the sort of vehicle-centric information that would be recorded by a vehicle under test, in order to see not only how that vehicle's behaving at specific locations, but also how it's interacting with other traffic, other pedestrians, and getting an independent perspective on that. We're also linking the real-world testbed to the virtual world, and a huge amount, in fact, probably well over 95% of all the testing that will be done with automated vehicles will be done virtually before the vehicles ever get onto the road. And this will be testing the AI systems, testing the link of AI to control, and making sure that AI system is making the right decisions in the right scenarios, but doing that in a computerized environment. By the time we get on road, we expect the vehicles to be performing in a very predictable way. But when we do get on road, we know that the vehicles will be encountering situations that they still have never encountered in virtual. And so there needs to be this process of alignment between how the vehicles perform in the real world and how they perform in virtual environments. And this testbed will offer the opportunity to do that by creating scenarios from real world experiences and then feeding that back into the virtual environment, so that we can look at how our vehicles perform differently in those two different types of environment. And then clearly, I think what's going to be needed as technologies develop and as mobility services develop around particularly automated technologies, we do need independent methods of verifying and validating how these systems work in the real world. A process of type approval will occur, or process of regulation, which may include type approval, will emerge around automated vehicles. But also, I think that authorities who are responsible for licensing these technologies and consumers and insurers will want different types of information about vehicle performance in the real world. This testbed provides a really important way for us to potentially generate and access that information. And then on the beta side of it, this is the user testing with real world use cases, understanding how new vehicle systems can operate in such a way as to improve the efficiency of delivery of these services, will be another key area. And of course, the safety and risk of those services being delivered in the real world will be a key element, and how those services are delivered to the stakeholders that are involved in that process. The planning and the execution of those trials is something that TRL as well is very experienced at and will be bringing to this type of work. The user trials and the management of those trials, particularly the users, extracting that information of experience and how well these types of technologies are delivering to the needs of, whether it be commuters or logistics operators or whoever it is that's using automated technologies. We need to be really listening to that information and ensuring that is captured in terms of how well these systems are actually performing, delivering to real needs, and then using that information in benefits evaluation for these systems. We're also providing access to the Living Lab through partner innovation programs, which is really important. This is primarily through our partner Cisco, who've been doing a huge amount of work through innovation. But I'll come on to something later as well, which is TRL establishing a shared research program as well to allow individual organizations to come together and undertake research and evaluation of new types of mobility service. Otherwise, it would be kind of too expensive or complex an exercise to undertake by themselves. As part of the capabilities that we're creating a data hub, which will allow us to provide data services in terms of aggregating data, bringing in data sets from external sources, which can really improve the scope of information that developers have to work with when they're understanding how well their vehicle or their mobility services operates in a particular environment. And this is, again, intended to add value to that data that otherwise would be just gathered from the vehicle alone. And clearly, as we go through, we talked about how the whole process around new car assessment program standards and approval kind of systems has developed in the past. And we're recognizing now that automated systems are going to require their own standards and mechanisms of approval. And we see this testbed as being a critical way to create the evidence around how these types of standards and approvals can be delivered, and then to provide the infrastructure to deliver those services. And also, we're working in London, we're working in a very globally visible environment, and we're fortunate to be working alongside London Legacy Development Corporation and the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park, not to mention a number of high-profile locations in Greenwich as well, that provide a fantastic backdrop to allow developer and automotive manufacturers to launch and showcase their new technologies as well. So we certainly want to be putting London and the UK in the best light by using the facilities for that purpose. But underpinning everything that we do, and I think you'll hear this a lot with automated vehicles and system developers, safety is an absolute paramount issue of importance for everybody involved in this work. And in doing that, we'll be creating control centres both in Greenwich and Olympic Park. We're creating an extensive safety case framework and a risk assessment and mitigation methodology that is building on the work that we're currently doing with partners here and off the back of the Gateway project as well. A few of the issues that we think we really need to be delivering on here is being able to provide live visual feeds from the routes so that we can not necessarily intervene in a safety sense, but be assured that our safety cases are being delivered in the right way, and that trials are being conducted in a controlled and managed environment, so that either participants in the trial or anybody else in the real world environment isn't exposed to risk that hasn't been defined within the program. So supervision and the participation in trials is a major issue within that, and we'll be controlling that very carefully. Obviously, providing access to communications and monitoring of what's going on in the field will be a critical role of these control centres, and coordination with the emergency services is again a critical factor for us. And this approach has worked very well for us on the Gateway project, where we had very close engagement with the Metropolitan Police and Fire and Rescue Services in London, and we're also taking that same approach with programs such as Driven and the Streetwise program as well. So this is really kind of demonstrating that in a little bit more of a visual sense. With the investment that's coming from the UK government and from industry, we're investing in test and development garages for the vehicles that will be brought to use the park, control rooms I've mentioned. I mentioned capturing independent source of information, so we'll be putting infrastructure into road environments. I mentioned the data hub, where we'll be creating the opportunity to aggregate multiple sources of data, both from our testing and from our partners, but also from external sources as well, where they can add value to the information we're capturing. We're also then looking to invest in automated systems that we can run on the park that we won't rely on anybody to bring in for us, but we can operate and use as a basis for undertaking testing where customers may want to look at what the behaviours are of individuals who are using automated systems. So to make this a real test bed, we need to be able to provide that access to automated vehicle systems ourselves, and we very much expect that capability to evolve quickly over time. We're also providing access to multiple different types of environment, and to be a really effective test bed, we think that we need access to both relatively simple environments, but also much more complex environments, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. We need new methods for evaluation and reporting. We need that NCAP for automated driving systems and for mobility service sort of efficiency evaluation. So that will be a big part of what we're creating, along with this support to innovation and supporting the development of new businesses and new solutions in this area. So I think we can add a lot of value to the innovation sector within smart mobility in London by doing that. So these are the testing areas, both in Queen Elizabeth Park to the north of the river and in Greenwich to the south of the river. What is great about these areas is they complement each other really well. So we have a relatively new build environment in Stratford at the Olympic Park, whereby we have a lot of the base infrastructure that we need to plug in additional, whether it be cameras or whether it be in-vehicle or in the environment, communications technology or location technologies can be done really well within Olympic Park. And then in Greenwich, we have a variety of really complex environments, from new build environment that's going on the Greenwich Peninsula right now, and the centre of leisure activities that are in that area with the O2 arena. But also then going to the east of the borough in Thamesmead, we have environments which are quite legacy or vehicle related sort of legacy environments around the new towns of Thamesmead, for example, where the infrastructure, the residential areas that were constructed in that area, I think in the 50s and 60s, really did focus on car ownership and really made car ownership almost a factor of life in those areas. They're relatively poorly served by public transport, no real access to rail services, certainly no tube services in those areas. And so it's a great area to look at how new mobility solutions can potentially address the challenges that the residents have in those areas of living without a car. And that really is a target for how new mobility, connected and autonomous vehicle mobility could help residents in large cities like London in the future. And then we have the historic maritime area of Greenwich in area number 3 there, which again, with its own challenges of narrow streets, very high tourist areas in and around the historic heart of Greenwich. So we've got lots of people moving around in those areas, lots of vehicles moving around on very narrow streets and in areas that are much more complex for humans to drive through, let alone machines. And then in area 4, we have some very high volume commuter routes in and out of the city, feeding the city to the M25 and the A2 and the A20. And these routes can form a really interesting test environment in terms of how automated systems can operate in congested areas, how they get on with other traffic, and how they can improve the efficiency of traffic movement. And just a graphic there just showing a little bit more detail of Queen Elizabeth Park, where we're expecting to link together the residential areas that are being created with the transport hubs and with the residential zones, and also with the facilities in Olympic Park as well. And this is all about being able to operate new systems in a relatively controlled environment. The Olympic Park is a bit more of a controlled environment than Greenwich, for sure. But we see this as being an opportunity to get these types of systems out onto the road at an early stage and to learn quickly about interacting with traffic in uncontrolled scenarios. A little bit of an indication of sort of some of the sort of technical vision around this, from the communications of wireless and 5G and existing 4G networks, through to the capturing of detailed information from CCTV, the vehicle to everything communication, vehicle to infrastructure, vehicle to vehicle communication, and the types of assets that we can see being installed around the roadside that help us both understand what the vehicles are doing, but also then for what the vehicles are doing from their own perspective, i.e. from devices that are mounted on vehicles, but also looking at what vehicles are doing from an external perspective. And that's where the equipment attached to the lampposts and the pop-up infrastructure that you can see on the right-hand side really come into their own, because this gives us an independent means of looking at vehicle behaviours and performance, and really gives us the evidence base to start evaluating how well these systems are performing in the real world. And this isn't necessarily about saying one system is not performing particularly well. It's about creating evidence about how that system can be developed and improved in order to increase its operational performance, but also then to be able to give us information, start benchmarking how we expect these types of systems to perform in the real world. And then at some point we move on to a stage where we can start doing evaluations of different vehicles operating different systems, but we're looking at, for example, the way that they interact with other vehicles. We're looking at the way that they cope with certain types of road environments. We're looking at the ways that they interact with pedestrians and cyclists. And we should be able to get to a point where we can quantify differences in behaviours between vehicles by using these approaches. And potentially then it might be appropriate to indicate that the different benchmark levels of vehicle performance. And that gives everybody much more information about the types of choices that they might make in terms of using automated vehicle services, purchasing automated vehicles with automated capabilities, or procuring services from service providers that are utilizing these kinds of vehicle systems. And I mentioned earlier about the need for us to be able to provide access to automated systems, and this is another one of the targets that we're working towards at the moment, is to bring in or to source automated vehicles that can be used by our customers to do test work where they want to understand how an automated system might be able to deliver a certain type of use case. So this could include automated pods or automated cars that are operating under the control of a known automated control system, or it could be open architecture vehicles whereby we have all the capability to control the vehicle, but actually what's being tried out in each different occasion is a new control logic, a new automated vehicle control system for the vehicle. So we think we'll be targeting providing those kinds of vehicle capabilities, and that they will form quite a key part of the research work we expect to undertake with our partners and with the private sector. Just a bit of background then. So I mentioned investment from UK government, the £19 million investment into connected autonomous vehicle infrastructure. And that investment is composed of the government investment and also industry investment. So government is providing a £13 million investment into the London testbed, and industry providing additional £6 million to add to that to make the 19. But over the course of the operation of the testbed, we will increase that level of industry investment up to about 25 million. So that the government and industry investments end up being 50-50 through the commercial operation of the testbed. So this isn't about a very expensive government science project whereby we're spending lots of money and not looking to really deliver any value. This is about creating a test environment which is going to deliver testing that's needed by the industry, which adds value to the development of these systems, and which ultimately gets connected and autonomous systems on the road quicker in a safe and controlled way, which gives the UK the best opportunity to use these systems and adapt to the availability of these systems to improve our own operational performance and ultimately GDP benefits through efficiency of operation of the transport network. And this is really something that the UK government is committed to achieving. And if you look at things like the industrial strategy, connected autonomous vehicles, new mobility is seen as a major element of that plan. So the customer base that we expect to be working with includes both collaborative innovation. So those projects I mentioned earlier, the Gateway project driven Streetwise, these projects that the UK government is currently investing in to stimulate technology development in this field in the UK will certainly be an area where the Living Lab will support that type of development. But we really see this as being a facility that is focused towards private users and private research and development. So working with OEMs or mobility service providers to utilize the facilities to demonstrate the performance of their systems and, as I say, move towards methods of evaluation, validation, benchmarking. We see as being critical for the future more widespread adoption of this technology. And also mentioned how we're working with a range of organisations to bring complementary organisations together to undertake shared programmes of research and development. And this is really where we have, I see it as stakeholders around the connected and autonomous vehicle space who really want to understand the impact of these technologies on their future business operations. Because there's no question that future connected and autonomous systems have great potential to disrupt existing business models. And I think that this, from an industry perspective, is certainly the key challenge, in the arrival and the proving of automated systems in the real world. There is serious potential for disruption, both in personal mobility and in goods delivery, that comes with this technology. And through our shared R&D program, we're working with a range of different organizations, from insurers to transport services providers to OEMs to tier ones, who are looking at what the potential disruption is to their business, and the shared research program provides a really effective way of doing that. And that's looking at multiple streams of how the technology will be introduced, the sorts of opportunities for utilizing the technologies in different use cases, building now to a multi-million-pound research program on a per annual basis. So we're certainly interested in having discussions with anybody who wants to get involved in those kinds of programs, and my contact details are at the end of this show. And really the purpose of that is to deliver best value for research and development investment. So if you are investing or plan to invest in these kinds of areas, the best bet is really to get maximum value for your investment. By building on the £19 million investment from government and industry at the moment, and combining your resources with others through the shared research program, that really does deliver that best value. And these are some of the organizations that have supported us through the process of developing the Living Lab. These aren't, I should say, all members of the Living Lab at this stage. We're moving towards launching that over the next month or two. And so those organizations will be announced at that time. Some of the other example organizations we're either working with on current projects, or again have supported the Living Lab through its bid stage and current implementation stage and build. Okay, so I will leave it there. My contact details are on there, my email address, so please do feel free to drop me a line if you would like to learn more about the shared research program or anything else that we're doing on the Smart Mobility Living Lab. But just me say thank you very much to Break for inviting us to participate, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Ewan. A really good end there, I think, to today's webinar, and some fascinating areas covered there. So thank you so much for that, and thank you for participating today. That brings us to the end of our 4 presentations and brings us on to the Q&A session. We have had a number of questions submitted throughout today's webinar. It's not too late if you'd like to submit further questions, so please do so via the question box now, and we'll try and come to those. We are joined by Ewan Parry and by Jonathan Flower, who are joining us live. So I'm just going to ask both of them to either unmute themselves, or I'm going to unmute you now. So hopefully you will be able to respond to some of these questions. So first up, I've got 2 questions really, Jonathan, for you, but I'm going to ask them together, as I do think they are interconnected really. So what key challenges did you face when implementing the Ventura project, and how has the project influenced your understanding of connected and autonomous vehicles and the implications this technology has for the future of mobility?
Thank you. Yeah, I'll just take those questions together then. In terms of challenges, obviously there were numerous. The project lasted for 3 years and involved both technological objectives as well as human factor objectives. In terms of the technology, after 2.5 years of successful running, we were midway through our 3rd trial when a key component on the vehicle gave up on us. It was a bespoke component, and so we had to pause the human factors trials for a couple of weeks while we replaced and repaired that. We were running our test trials alongside a big MOD area, and we had problems with some of our connectivity along that side of the test run. So we wondered if there was some blocking mechanisms coming from the MOD. So they were things we had to get around. We operated our trial 2 over the summer, and a lot of the foliage on the test circuit grew during the weeks of the testing, and so on windy days, branches that weren't there had grown and were being detected by the vehicle, and so the issue of whether it's safe to drive through a branch or foliage, or whether you have to go around it, were the kinds of things we had to deal with on the technological side. Then on the live human factor trials, we had just ordinary everyday issues like deer running across the track and foxes. We were partly operating a car park that came in and out between our circuits, so cars were being marshalled in and out. On one occasion, we had a car crash of 2 of the cars coming into the car park that blocked our circuit. We also had one night travellers moved onto our circuit and set up camp and blocking the roads. Just very practical things. And then things like the weather, our participants, particularly the cyclists and pedestrians who were outside of the vehicle observing some of the interactions and rating their trust in the interactions, weren't particularly enamoured on very windy and wet days, although we were able to operate. So very practical things there. And also in a simulator, some people experienced nausea, which was an issue. In terms of what we learned, one thing that I didn't mention, which may be of relevance, particularly for fleet managers, particularly if you're in public transport, was we part of the project looked at willingness to use and willingness to pay for different forms of autonomous vehicles. And one thing we saw there, we looked at autonomous buses, autonomous taxis, autonomous private cars, and autonomous shared taxis. And one thing we found there was a willingness to pay and use for private cars, a willingness to pay and use for taxis, a great reluctance to both pay for and use shared taxis. So the idea of sharing a small space with strangers without the presence of a driver wasn't something that many people found very attractive. But the biggest thing we found there was the willingness to pay for and use autonomous buses. So there's a premium that people were willing to pay. They were willing to pay 43% more than current bus services, and given that bus operators typically the cost of a driver is between 50 and 70%. Great opportunities there, perhaps, for autonomous buses operating bigger services because you can save money and maybe 24 hours as well. So maybe that's an opportunity.
Okay, no, thank you, Jonathan. Really interesting there, particularly around the buses and you know, people willing to pay a premium for them. Very interesting. Thank you, Jonathan. A couple more for you. And again, I think I can probably pair these two separate questions together, really. So what will be the biggest challenges faced by fleet managers and professional drivers as increasingly automated vehicles begin to appear on the roads? And how would you recommend fleet managers begin to engage with connected and autonomous vehicles, or is it too soon?
Okay, in terms of challenges, I think one of the obvious ones is the role of drivers and jobs. Obviously, autonomous vehicles will not ultimately require drivers, and although that can have benefits for fleet in terms of cost savings, it's obviously going to be an issue for jobs. We did have an interesting thing last summer, so a year ago, we had a demonstration in the public area in Bristol, and we just interacted with members of the public as they were either having rides in autonomous vehicles or just observing the autonomous vehicles going around. And I did speak to a number of both taxi drivers and truck drivers on holiday, and I expected a negative response from them, but generally they seemed positive and just saw this as inevitability, and that it would just be a period of time of adjusting the job market. There are also opportunities. We had a bus operator as one of our partners on Venturous. So part of our trials we did on open roads, and we had our autonomous vehicle communicating with buses. So we had an autonomous vehicle coming behind a bus that stopped at a bus stop on a blind bend. And then as we used some of the sensors that were already on the buses in Bristol, which communicated with the vehicle, which would allow our vehicle to see around the bus and round the bend if it was clear to go, and also to know whether the doors of the bus were open or closed. The premise being that if the doors closed, then even if it was clear around the vehicle, the bus was about to pull off. So there were opportunities, collaboration and connectivity between buses and other autonomous vehicles. In terms of ways that fleet managers could get involved, I think generally it's a case of keeping a watching brief on progress, but there are certainly opportunities for some fleet managers of both small and large companies to get involved in some of the research consortiums for testing that's going on.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think we've got Ewan back on live now. So Ewan, I'll just put those two questions to you as well, if that's okay. So the questions were, what will be the biggest challenges faced by fleet managers and professional drivers as increasingly automated vehicles begin to appear on the roads? And the second part of it really is, how would you recommend fleet managers begin to engage with connected and autonomous vehicles, or is it too soon?
Yeah, so challenges for fleet managers. I mean, I suppose I kind of think of this as challenges and opportunities at this stage. The opportunity is to utilise these technologies to deliver cost savings into the fleet operation, and also drive a safety performance, a higher safety performance into fleets as well. One of the projects we're currently working on is the platooning project for Highways England and DFT, and that is being evaluated. The purpose of that is an evaluation of the platooning technologies in order to really understand the benefits that it can deliver to fleets, and well, in addition to the sort of efficiency, safety, we're also talking about kind of economy savings, fuel economy savings as well. So there's significant opportunities, I think, as the technologies evolve. I think it's a challenge to really understand and to really be fully aware of the sort of status of the technologies, in terms of market readiness. In this area at the moment, there's a lot of noise in the media around connected autonomous vehicles and how the technology is evolving, but there's a long way to go before we make the technology a really commercially viable option. And I think, kind of being realistic about those things right now in terms of full autonomy and the higher levels of autonomy particularly is something that we need to be aware of. And really in the meantime, being really fully aware of the advances in safety technology, whether that be fit on vehicle or retrofit safety technologies, which potentially can add significant benefits.
Yeah, I mean, just one final question, Ewan. We've talked quite a lot throughout today's webinar about cybersecurity, particularly kind of the risks around people being able to potentially gain access to controlling vehicles. And one of the questions that we had throughout your presentation a couple of times actually was around how are stakeholders addressing the issue of cybersecurity during the trials that you're running.
Well, the first thing we did actually with the Gateway trial, which I mentioned at the start of the presentation, was to ensure that we had a very strong framework around which we managed cybersecurity of the vehicles, and that is something that is reported on, I think, in the documentation that's on the Gateway website. So if you do go to the Gateway website, just search Gateway Project and Greenwich, then I think you'll find that easy enough, and we have a publication section on there in which some of these issues are addressed. But as we've learned a lot through what we've done in the Gateway project, much as the previous speaker was talking about the venture and the learning that has been achieved through that as well. And actually, as we moved into Smart Mobility Living Lab, we're taking all that knowledge with us, and so we're really building on, from the cyber side, we're building on that framework that was generated alongside Imperial College. We work with on that, and we're building that now with partners such as Cisco, who we're working with on the delivery of the Living Lab.
Thank you, Ewan. Okay, thank you. I think that answers all of the questions that have been put forward throughout today's webinar. Please do submit any further questions to us, and we'll happily put those to all of our speakers and circulate the responses to those in follow-up to today's event. That just leaves me with a final few pointers and reminders more than anything. A big thank you to all of our speakers today. A copy of their presentations and a recording of today's webinar will be available online shortly, and we'll circulate that to you all. In addition, we'll be publishing a best practice guidance report based on the presentations given at today's webinar as well, and we'll circulate a copy of that to you all too. We will be sending you an online feedback form following today's event, and we would really appreciate it if you could take the time to complete that for us. It will literally take you no more than 60 seconds, so please do take a look at that for us. And finally, we've got a full programme of events taking place throughout the second half of 2018. On screen now, you can see our next scheduled webinars. I'd also like to take this opportunity to remind you about our Fleet Safety Awards here in the UK and over in Australasia, which will recognise the achievements of those working to help reduce the number of road crashes involving at-work drivers. Whilst the deadline for submissions has now passed, you can still very much get involved with the ceremonies that we've got taking place later on this year in October. And if you'd like to do so, please visit the fleetsafetyawards.com website to find out more information. If you'd like to hear more about Brake Professional and the work that we do here at Brake with at-work drivers, then please email us and get in touch with us at professional@brake.org.uk or via any of our websites, and we'd love to hear from you. And again, that just leaves me to thank our speakers once again. It really is much appreciated, and we couldn't run these webinars without you. So thank you for your time and commitment to today's event. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.